Kierkegaard. It is now about 4 years ago that I got the notion of wanting to try my luck as an author. I remember it quite clearly. It was on a Sunday. Yeah, that's it, a Sunday afternoon. I was seated as usual out of doors at the cafe in the Fredericksburg Garden. I had been a student for half a score of years. Although never lazy, all my activity nevertheless was like a glittering inactivity, a kind of occupation for which I still have a great partiality and for which perhaps I even have a little genius. I read much, spending the remainder of the day idling and thinking, or thinking and idling, but that was all it came to. So I sat there and smoked my cigar until I lapsed into thought. Among other thoughts, I remember these. You are going on, I said to myself, to become an old man without being anything, and without really undertaking to do anything. On the other hand, wherever you look about you in literature and in life, you see the celebrated names and figures, the precious and much heralded men who are coming into prominence and are much talked about, the many benefactors of the age, who know how to benefit mankind by making life easier and easier. Some by railways, some by omnibuses and steamboats, others by the telegraph, others by easily apprehended compendiums and short recitals of everything worth knowing. And finally, the true benefactors of the age who make spiritual existence in virtue of thought easier and easier, yet more and more significant. And what are you doing? Here my soliloquy was interrupted because my cigarette was smoked out and a new one had to be lit. So I smoked again, and then suddenly this thought flashed through my mind. You must do something. But inasmuch as with your limited capacities, it will be impossible to make anything easier than it has already become, you must, with the same humanitarian enthusiasm as the others, undertake to make something harder. This notion pleased me immensely, and at the same time it flattered me to think that I, like the rest of them, would be loved and esteemed by the whole community. For when all combine in every way to make everything easier, there remains only one possible danger, namely, that the ease becomes so great that it becomes altogether too great. And then there's only one want left, though it is not yet a felt want, when people will want difficulty. Out of love for mankind and out of despair at my embarrassing situation, seeing that I had accomplished nothing and was unable to make anything easier than it had already been made, and moved by a genuine interest in those who make everything easy, I conceived it as my task to create difficulties everywhere. Kierkegaard again. There's a view of life which conceives that where the crowd is, there's also the truth. And that in truth itself there is need of having the crowd on its side. There's another view of life which conceives that wherever there is a crowd, there is immediately untruth. So that, to consider for a moment the extreme example, even if every individual, each for himself, in private, were to be in possession of the truth, yet in the case they were all to get together in a crowd to which any sort of decisive significance is attributed, a voting, noisy, audible crowd, untruth would at once be in evidence. For a crowd is the untruth. In a godly sense, it is true eternally, Christianly, as St. Paul says, that only one attains the goal, which is not meant in a comparative sense, because a comparison takes others into account. It means that every man can be that one, God helping him therein, but only one attains the goal. And again, this means that every man should be careful about having to do with the others, and essentially should talk only with God and with himself, for only one attains the goal. And again, this means that man, or to be a man, is akin to deity. In a worldly and temporal sense, it will be said by the man of bustle, sociability, and amicableness, how unreasonable that only one attains the goal. For it is far more likely that many, by the strength of united effort, should attain the goal. And when we are many, success is more certain, and it is easier for each man severally. True enough. It is far more likely. And it is true also with respect to all earthly and material goods. If it is allowed to have its way, this becomes the only true point of view, and it does away with God and eternity and with man's kinship with deity. It does away with it, or it transforms it into a fable. and puts in its place the modern, or we might rather say the old pagan notion that to be a man is to belong to a race endowed with reason, to belong to it as a specimen, so that the race or species is higher than the individual, which is to say that there are no individuals but only specimens. But eternity, which arches over and high above the temporal, tranquil as the starry vault at night, and God in heaven, who in the bliss of that sublime tranquility holds in survey, without the least sense of dizziness at such a height, those countless multitudes of men, and knows each single individual by name. He, the great examiner, says that only one attains the goal.